Welcome to the selected ones. The individual who can't be controlled is the most dangerous in a room full of manipulators. But that was probably spoken by someone who was about to leave a cult meeting like a boss. You weren't supposed to be able to survive their rituals. You weren't supposed to be able to see through their robes and the chants they repeated. And you definitely weren't meant to go without being injured, bent, or spiritually bulletproof. But here you are. And now they're interested not because they respect you, but because they're scared of what you did that they couldn't understand. You shook the very foundation of their bogus godhood by being real. We should be honest. Many cult leaders are not miraculous prophets. They are self-centered and insecure, and they believe they are God and have a Wi-Fi password. But everything changed once you got inside their groups. You didn't follow the rules. You bent the grid, and instead of altering you, they started to desire you. Why? Because you show them. This is true. Psychologists have studied the guru effect, which is when people believe things that aren't real. If you say it with enough confidence and incense. But for certain people, you get the spiritual Wi-Fi password right from the source. You don't just know what's wrong. You could feel the room's vibration go down. They tried to learn from you, copy you, and dominate you, but in the end, they were absolutely infatuated with you. What was supposed to be a battle between good and evil turned into a love tale and a loss of self. They are now awake, questioning all they believe and writing poetry about you in their leather-bound journal. So get ready. In this movie, we'll show you what happens when a real one wanders into a phony kingdom. The whole temple shakes as a selected one walks into a hall of false prophets. And in the end, they didn't want to be in control of you. They wanted to be like you. Let's get going. To start, you didn't seduce them. You ruined up their spell work. They didn't care about you. They were stunned by what they couldn't do anything about. They had built a whole empire on falsehoods, false light, and charm. They thought they were in love, but they were actually trying to dominate you. But then you showed up. You didn't join in on the game. Their names, candles, or song lyrics didn't cast a spell on you. You didn't go along with their mood. You were all alone. They were terrified of that. You didn't make them desire you. You screwed them up. People like these don't want to be equal. They're seeking for places to get energy and spirits that they can connect with. They say things like alignment and spiritual unity to hide their hunger. But what they really want is power. Be in command. To pray. And most people do what they're advised to do. Quick. But you didn't. You were like a bolt of lightning in a cave. You didn't need their permission. You didn't need them to inform you that you were correct. You already knew who you were. That's when things started to shift. Because they don't pay attention to the mood when a chosen one comes in. They exhibit it. You didn't try to change them. You were right. And that presence brought out all the horrible things they were trying to conceal. It wasn't about how you looked, what you said, or even what you provided. It was your frequency. It was how your spirit led you. How your eyes saw through other people. Not just staring at them. They weren't able to fix it. That's when the interest started. They claimed it was love, but it was really spiritual fear. Just being there made them see things differently. Their rituals couldn't control you. Based on your energy measurements, they couldn't identify who you were. You weren't afraid of how strong they were. You ruined up their spell work without even trying. They had been preparing to be heavenly leaders for years. But next to you, it all felt like a show. They tried to control you by charming you, being passive, or even making threats that weren't clear. But nothing worked. And it drove them insane. You were too strong to be fooled and too spiritually strong to be shaken. You didn't make any trouble. You brought heavenly disorder. They didn't care about each other. They were shocked to encounter someone they couldn't manage, convert, or control. You were the problem in their system. That's why they still can't get over you. Second, they thought you were a threat to their beliefs and looked at you like one. You didn't just disturb someone. You screwed up an entire way of thinking. They weren't studying you because they thought you were cool. They were gazing at you because you were breaking up the order that they had based their world on. They expected you would do things differently. You didn't fit into the roles they had already given to other individuals. You didn't feel impressed, terrified, or confused. You asked questions without being scared. You didn't try to get answers. You were the answer. That made them nervous. People like that aren't used to being asked questions without anybody saying anything. But the electricity in your aura made their mask come off. Everyone around them thought they were the most significant spiritual person. They had followers who would do anything for them, and a system that kept them in command. But when you arrived here, everything changed. You didn't like their names or the way they did things. You saw the breaks. You could see the ego behind the spiritual talk. You can sense the performance behind what people call peace. And without even trying, you made it hard for them to overlook what they had buried behind layers of control and manipulation. They thought you were just another person who was passing through. Although they were scared when they found out you weren't easily swayed or convinced, although they didn't show it in public. Not that, but not too hard. They couldn't figure out what you were. They started to watch you, test you, and make fun of you to see how you would respond. But nothing worked. At that point, the interest became greater since people were attempting to figure you out, but you could already see through them. They didn't want you to be there because you made them feel unsafe. You made them doubt their own wisdom, strength, and stories. You were everything that they said you were. That hurt the most. You didn't have to announce you were chosen. You were right. You revealed how worthless their beliefs were simply by being yourself. Not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence that made their authority look artificial. They knew they weren't in command of the room when you got there. That's why they started to think you were a threat. You weren't acting out. You were free. And in their world, the spirit of independence is the worst of all. Third, you didn't burn up all of your energy. It was too powerful to consume. They weren't able to take you in. That's what it really came down to. They are used to people melting in their hands. People who believe that charm is love and control is safety. Most individuals lose it when they are praised, pushed, or placed in a tough spot. That's right. But you didn't give up. You didn't appreciate being the center of attention. You didn't fall for it when they tried to get you excited or compliment you in a deceptive manner. They thought they could convince you to join them like everyone else, but you weren't spiritually weak or looking for a place to belong. You didn't need a location to fit in. You already know where you come from. They wanted to suck in your light as a parasite does. Come close to the mirror. You learn a language by mimicking how it sounds. But instead of getting what they wanted, they got too much. You weren't only smart. You were on fire. Your excitement didn't help them feel good about themselves. It revealed how empty they were. They were upset because they weren't ready to meet someone who wouldn't give up their power to feel safe or alter who they were to fit in. It messed them up. They didn't know why nothing worked. They wanted to hit them with love. They tried to control things in a stealthy manner. They even tried to pretend they didn't enjoy it. They tried everything, but nothing worked. You were calm and in a hurry. Can't read it. That's when the fear really set in. They couldn't place things into categories because they couldn't control them. And they couldn't regulate things that didn't fit into a category. Most people give in because they want to fit in, be accepted, feel protected, or learn more about themselves. But you came in whole. That's why they were sick and bewildered. You weren't being rude when you were confident of yourself, and you weren't giving up when you were silent. They couldn't imitate their strength. You weren't searching for anything. You were someone who showed. And the closer they got to you, the more they felt their own mask slipping off. They thought they could fool you, but they had to deal with their own problems instead. While you were there, they felt spiritually ill. Not because you were dark, but because your brilliance was too much for their weak appetite. They couldn't deal with someone who had already moved on from the games they played to feel powerful. You didn't make them feel better about themselves. You were a mirror, and they couldn't handle what they saw. Fourth, they didn't like you. They fell on their own. They didn't actually care about you. They fell into a part of themselves. They had worked hard their whole lives to keep away from them. You shattered something in them. It wasn't love. It wasn't even a desire. It was exposure. They were afraid of what they saw in the spiritual mirror that was you. You didn't try to make them better. You didn't stand up to them. But your enthusiasm forced them to confront the truth, even if they didn't want to. All the masks, the rhetoric about spirituality, and the meticulously planned characters. They were falling apart, and they didn't know how to stop it. You didn't really need anything from them, however. You weren't trying to win their approval or get ahead in the world. You were just there. And that peacefulness, that feeling of being whole, and that serene sense of purpose, it made them see how worthless what they did was. You weren't trying to teach them a lesson, but being there did. You simply revealed how different they were from what they stated they were. They were interested, not because they loved you, but because they felt that being close to you may help them solve their issues. They thought that if they could only stay near to your light, it would change them. But being near doesn't ensure things will get better. Being close to you simply made the truth louder. And the more they tried to keep your energy, the more their own sense of self began to break down. They started to replicate what you said, what you did, and even what you thought without realizing that you weren't acting. You were being. That difference is what made them unstable. You were real, and they were produced. They thought they could take your component, figure it out, and ride your frequency. But instead of becoming better, they broke up, not into love. You didn't make them fall apart. You were only the spark. What broke was always feeble. They believed you were there to help them when you were just delivering the truth. And the truth doesn't help the ego. It ends the illusion. That's why they weren't able to hold it together. Because your light didn't fill them up. It showed them where they were still missing things. Number 5, they couldn't terrify you or start anything with you. They threw everything at you. Their stillness, mind games, and unusual power moves were all part of a spiritual practice. But you didn't give up. You didn't go after them to get answers or attempt to win them back. At that point, they knew you weren't like the others. When spiritual pressure is hidden under the idea of enlightenment, most people give in. But you didn't just pass their tests. You pulled them apart without saying anything. People were used to being scared of them. They employed threats that looked like initiation. You know, the sort that makes the spiritual community seem like a secret club where you have to go through agony to be accepted. But it didn't work when they did it to you. You didn't have to be there. You weren't striving to fit into their system of power. You walked in like someone who has been through hell before and wasn't impressed by people in white robes and soothing voices acting like God. They wanted you to grimace, question yourself, stop being silent, and reach for their hand to prove that they still had power. But you didn't. You stood strong not because you were proud, but because it was the right thing to do. You didn't have to show anything. Your power didn't work. It was rooted. That was what scared them the most. If they couldn't get into your head, they couldn't influence your spirit. And they demonstrated how weak they actually were by not being able to restrain themselves. You passed all the exams since you had already taken the real ones. The kind that doesn't come with applause or incense, but with scars and wisdom. You can't learn anything from a book. You move like someone who has wrestled with the dark and come back with a clear vision from God. They thought it was hazardous instead than sacred, which is how they felt. They couldn't start you because suffering, loneliness, betrayal, and resurrection had already begun. And they couldn't terrify you because you weren't afraid of being alone, not being understood, or being left out. You have already faced the divide and accepted it. You didn't have to be in their group. You were the circle. That's why they couldn't handle you. You didn't want to be chosen. You had already been sent. 6th, they couldn't change you since you were born awake. They couldn't transform you since you were never asleep in the first place. You walked in knowing who you were, how to play the game, and what the mood was like in the room. Since the source had already built up your spirit, they couldn't feed you old religion or fool you with mystical-sounding nonsense. They were used to getting individuals who sought answers to follow them. But you were the answer they didn't see coming. They didn't know what to do with someone who couldn't be indoctrinated. They employed language that was nuanced, emotional bait, collective pressure, and soft manipulation. To get you to do what they wanted, they would say things like, "You're not aligned yet," or "You need to give up more." But nothing worked because you were aware of how strong you were. You didn't need to be roused up by their levels or rituals. They were afraid of you because you were born with a clear, calm, and peaceful spirit. They enjoyed the idea of your power until they realized they couldn't handle it. You didn't say anything nice about them. You didn't say what they said. You didn't do what they told you to do. You were sure of what you knew. Not in a disrespectful manner, but clearly. And your clarity was unnerving. You didn't need their support. You had your own flame. You didn't try to fit in. You screwed everything up just by standing up for what you believe in. You were the weak link in their scheme. They obtained their power by making people believe in their spiritual tale and manipulating them. But you couldn't be sold a lie. You had already seen through. Every time they tried to figure you out, define you, or correct you, something within them came apart. Because you weren't acting right, they were becoming more and more confused as they tried to figure you out. You were, and they didn't have a map for it. You weren't brainwashed because you couldn't rent out your ideas. Fear didn't change who you are. It was formed in God's fire. At first, they thought you were just another person they might aid, but they quickly realized you were a leader. Someone who was supposed to lead, not follow. A person who didn't need aid but helped others face their own falsehoods. They couldn't forget you because they couldn't alter who you are. 7. You stood up. What they worked hard to keep hidden. You didn't just show up in their life. You ruined their history. You didn't judge when you got there. You made me think about things. And that memory bothered them long before they became false spiritual leaders. A number of them were actual seekers who were smart, sensitive, and even good at what they did. But at some time, they traded their innocence for power. They stopped becoming bigger and started doing stuff. They stopped following God's rules and started behaving like God. Then you showed up. Not polished, not power-hungry, nor searching for a platform, just pure. And that innocence wasn't foolish. I already knew it. Before their ego took control, you looked like them. Before the manipulation, there was the entitlement. The yearning to be adored. Your presence brought out something deep inside them. The first plan, the one that made them cry while praying and work without wanting to be seen. That used to feel God without wanting to be in the spotlight. And that's why they didn't want to be with you. They had been avoiding you for years because you were the mirror. You didn't mean to do it. You weren't trying to show them. But you're all alone. Took their personality apart. They couldn't handle how sad they were about what they had become when they saw a younger, whole version of themselves. They wanted to get close to you not just because they were curious, but also because they wanted to get back something they had given up on a long time ago. But instead of feeling bad, they chose to eat. They thought that if they could take in your essence, they would feel whole again. But your light couldn't be moved. It wasn't borrowed. It was gained through pain, loneliness, and the truth that never ends. So they missed. Not because you hurt them, but because you reminded them that you weren't just a person to them. You were a ghost. They buried a mirror of their souls to become who they are now. And seeing that ghost was too much. You didn't break them. You told them. That's why they couldn't love you in a nice way. That is why they couldn't leave you alone. Deep down, they gave their lives for you. And the one thing they couldn't get back. You can't be touched on a spiritual level. And it drives them crazy. They did all they could to hurt you. Mind games, flattery, ignoring someone, false beliefs, spiritual intimidation, and even campaigns of defamation. And you still didn't give up. You didn't quit. You didn't lose your identity. That's when they realized you weren't the only one. You were safe. You weren't safe because you were weak. You were secure because you were a gift from heaven. And everyone who tried to tamper with you without knowing it set off ancient consequences. They didn't understand that your covering wasn't religious. It was out of this world. It came from a time before this one. Before the names. Before the ceremonies. You weren't just another person looking for something who fell into their trap. You were one, and it drove them insane. They couldn't alter your spirit no matter how much they tried to twist the tail. They couldn't block the frequency your spirit was tuned onto, thus you weren't reacting to their trickery. There were more than just angels around. You are one, but not the kind that is used to produce stained glass windows, which is quite delicate. You are the kind of person that has been kicked out of toxic systems and isn't scared in the dark. You walk with fire in your bones and warnings in your silence. You didn't lose your grace. You become stronger when you fight. And it's the kind of energy that makes devils sweat while they are trying to hide. They thought that altering your name would stop you from having an influence. If they didn't pay attention to you, you may become smaller. If they tricked you, you may lose your way. But nothing worked. Because you weren't trying to get others to like you. You didn't want anybody to follow you. You were just being sent away. And the ones that are sent don't ask for platforms. They are like thunder that scares away the fakes. You can't lock up your spirit. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't just walk. You truly do have consequences. They were afraid of you because they couldn't control you, and you didn't have to fight back. Just the way you looked was enough to tell me that certain ghosts are off limits. It's not only dumb to try to touch something God has sealed. It's fatal. That's why they're breaking down. Not because you attacked them, but because their weapons never struck. 9. They didn't want you to be a part of it. They asked you to go down on your knees. They never truly wanted to talk to you. As soon as you enter their orbit, they planned to take you down. They could tell something was off with you, but they couldn't place their finger on it. You weren't easily impressed or surprised. You didn't jump at the possibility to gain titles. You didn't say anything nice about their spiritual power. And that was enough to make you a danger to their fantasy. Because everyone in their world had a task to accomplish. The people who prayed, the ones who copied, and the people who went along with it. But you didn't come to play. You came in fully aware, grounded, and not at all aware of their covert plot. They never thought of you as their equal. They believed you were a threat since your light might shine without their permission. You didn't beg to be chosen. You already knew you were. They broke up because they didn't trust one another that much. You didn't speak down to them. You spoke to them like you knew what you were talking about. And it highlighted how different their practiced spirituality was from your true spirituality. Their obsession with you wasn't love. It was a win. You were for something. They weren't able to create something fresh. They wanted to control you, mold you, and make you depend on them. If they could control you, someone who was obviously selected, it would make their fake rain feel genuine. It would make their photos seem authentic. But when you didn't bow, break, or act stupid to fit in with their fake order, they had to face the truth. They didn't really have any power. It was manipulation via clever advertising. They try to make you feel horrible. You make them feel like they're the only ones, you laud them, and you shame them. Anything to get you to give in. You didn't stand your ground because you were angry. You did it to remember. You remembered who you were, and you weren't going to give up your soul just to make someone else feel like they were in command of theirs. They didn't want your things. They wanted your bow. They didn't want additional light. They looked for a flash they might capture. But you couldn't purchase your fire. You weren't meant to worship fake gods. You were created to show them. And all you had to do to spoil their entire show was stand up straight and not move. Number 10, you beat their titles without saying a thing. They wore their identities like Armor Master Guru, Prophet, and High Priestess. They wanted those names to feel genuine, be heard, and have a voice. But none of those titles could stop them from realizing the truth that your presence revealed them when you stepped in. You didn't give me a spiritual resume when we met. You didn't need to. Your excitement spoke more than any introduction could have without saying a word. You screwed up the complete order of command. They could sense the little stress. That command that wasn't spoken. That feeling of being seen through. Not just being seen. Because you didn't follow the rules for spiritual performance. You walked with real authority, not because you knew more or quoted better, but because your soul was powerful in a manner that other people only purported to know. You don't get ahead of them by claiming you do. You get ahead of them by really doing it. And that truly bothered them since their titles were merely clothing. It was one of your cloaks. They became stronger from the support and following they had. You come from combat and alignment. They needed followers and rituals to feel powerful. You only had to breathe. And in an instant, the whole room altered. They spoke kind things about you in public, complimented your gift, and called you special. They even tried to get you involved so you wouldn't know they were terrified of you. Not because you were awful, but because you spoke the truth. And they couldn't keep up their falsehoods because you were so clear-headed. You didn't let them know what you were doing. You showed them by being honest. That's the most scary kind of exposure. When nothing is spoken, yet everything is known. They didn't know how to defeat someone who wasn't attempting to win. They didn't know how to copy someone whose plan originated from God. They didn't know how to get someone to quiet up who wasn't even talking, but whose presence showed everything they were trying to hide. You didn't seize their crowns. They never put them on in the first place. They just never expected that someone without a title would come in with the weight of God's approval. That's what made you impenetrable, unforgettable, and difficult to deny. First of all, they didn't like how you looked. Your innocence made them afraid. They didn't like you because of how you looked. They were surprised by how pure your energy was. You had a frighteningly pure quality. And in their world, being pure isn't normal. It gets in the way. It's dangerous. Impacts how frequently control, illusion, and performance occurs. You weren't attempting to show off. You didn't bring crystals, candles, spiritual discussion, or drama with you. You didn't seem strong. You were in command. And that came from your actual unvarnished self. You were divine even before the performance. It's uncommon to find that kind of purity in a society where people attempt to seem spiritual. It's raw, unrefined, and unapologetic. Your honesty wrecked the entire show. You didn't have to wear white robes or chant to indicate that you were doing the right thing. Your quiet informed me about storms you had been through. Your glance indicated to be wary. Your stroll meant something. You didn't go after becoming holy. You were the one, and they couldn't handle it. They were worried about how innocent you were. It made them reflect about what they had lost, given up on their way to power. They didn't just want to be near it. They wanted to own it, to wear it like a stolen jewel. Some individuals attempted to emulate it in the hopes that it would get them the same level of respect that you naturally drew to yourself. Some others attempted to damage it only to prove that your light may not be as good as theirs. And the worst among them wanted to entirely destroy it. Every time they saw you, they were reminded of how they had hurt you. But your purity couldn't be bought, copied, or destroyed since it wasn't only on the surface. It comes from being disciplined, choosing to be right above being praised, and choosing to tell the truth even when it was simpler to lie. They thought that if they got close enough, they could remove what made you unique. But you couldn't share your brightness with anybody else. It occurred because you followed your calling, not because you were near to theirs. That's why they were so interested in you. You didn't come to charm. You came to clean. That's why they never forgot about you. You were their reality and helped them feel every facet of themselves, even if they sought to conceal it. They imagined it was long gone. Number. Your silence didn't imply you gave up. There was a plan. Because you were silent, they assumed you were doing what they told you to do. But they didn't realize they were in front of a strategist, not a weak person, when they were trying to figure you out. You were receiving information. Every break, every shift in energy that wasn't in sync, and every instruction that was essentially manipulation disguised up as knowledge. You saw it all. You weren't quiet because you were terrified. You were quiet because you were thinking. You weren't trying to fit in. You could tell who was real and who was simply putting on a show to garner attention, while others utilized techniques to earn your favor. You sat back and watched the show. You saw when a mask came off. You watched how they used religion as a weapon, stopping those who raised inquiries, putting those who didn't fit in alone, and offering prizes for following orders without thinking about them. You watched how their energy shifted when you didn't behave like the others, when you didn't clap when you were meant to, when you didn't fall into their phony brightness. They started to worry then as they didn't know what you would do next. They couldn't measure the power. You didn't behave foolish because you weren't smart. You behaved silly because you recognized that ego had to think less of you first. That offered you space to observe the complete structure properly without being trapped in it. You let them show you who they truly were. And when you had seen enough, when the truth was too loud to ignore, you didn't fight. You didn't ask. You didn't do anything to fix it. You left, and you didn't just walk away. You went without asking for your time, dignity, or soul back because they never had them. You didn't give up by being silent. It was your armor. A fortuitous delay provided you time to examine the situation, discover out what was actually going on, and wait for your escape route to become obvious. And when it occurred, you didn't make a sound. You made a difference. They had no clue that was going to happen. The whole time they were trying to brainwash you, you were quietly figuring them out. That's why they're still terrified. Because you didn't run away. You went up. And now they are wondering how someone they thought they had under control turned out to be the one wielding the blade the entire time. Number. Your departure was the beginning of their collapse. They believed that getting rid of you would give them greater authority and that your absence would provide them peace and order. They didn't anticipate that you leaving would be the start of their demise, as you weren't just another person in the room. You were the truth that kept the whole thing together, even when they didn't understand it. You were the quiet resistance in a system predicated on falsehoods. And when you left, the mask didn't just come off. It broke. They were continuously uncomfortable with you, but it also kept the illusion continuing. You were the standard that everyone else followed. Even if you never said anything, other people automatically judged everything by it. Your energy exposed what was untrue, and when you weren't there to keep the vibe consistent, everything they had erected on fear, ego, and control began to come apart on its own. People started to pay notice. The manipulation didn't go as intended. The charm didn't operate the same way. The mood became heavier, more obvious, and stranger. Because you weren't there to see them, there was no more mirror to expose their defects and no more balance to make the crazy appear heavenly. Some of the persons who used to watch you be rejected started to wake up. They remembered how you behaved, how you moved, and how you never gave up. And it set something off. You became the silent witness that brought down the whole thing, not because you fought back, but because you left with your soul intact. That frightened them more than anything else. Once the one they couldn't bend goes, everyone else starts to question why they ever bent in the first place. They lost more than just a follower. They could feel like they lost their feeling of control. The energy is not the same. The eyes around them are sharper. There are more questions now. The loyalty is weaker as you were never merely a quiet guy in the background. You were the string. Everything is coming apart now that you're not here. One stitch at a time, one line at a time. And all you did was leave number. You didn't injure them. They were already broken. You just said no to becoming next. When you met them, they were already breaking. You just didn't join the other spirits who were ready to split up with them. You didn't produce the damage. It was already there, disguised below layers of charm, control, and artificial holiness. A long time before you got there. They were bleeding inside. Their spiritual force was all a show. Fear and ego were intertwined into their confidence. But other individuals went along with it, offering fealty in exchange for safety, acceptance, or a place to fit in. You weren't built that way. You identified the defects, the lies that were concealed as reality, and the disparities. You could tell they wanted power behind their sermons. You could see that they utilized love to keep people in line and acceptance to keep them in jail. But you didn't bow. You just stood there. You didn't hold on, you asked. You didn't mean to, but you showed the problem without raising your voice. In a world full with fake people, being real might cause issues. They blamed you when they couldn't change you. You broke something that was already broken, they claimed. But you truly don't want to be another shattered piece of their messed up empire. You weren't rude. You weren't being bad. You just wouldn't go along with it. You didn't want to appear little so that someone else could feel big. You gave them the mirror so they might see themselves without any spiritual makeup, just as they are. That's what worries them. It's not what you did. It's what you didn't do. You didn't give up your voice to fit in. You didn't give up your capacity to separate right from wrong to stay comfy. You didn't let fear get the best of you. And that is the greatest risk in their world. Others may start standing up too because you wouldn't bend. You didn't kill them. You didn't inform them about your preparations for retaliation or rumor. You left clean, clear, and whole. And that style of leaving, it creates a sound. It grows larger. They can't explain away the mark it left because the one person they couldn't corrupt is now the one person they can't forget. And the reflection you left behind is still gazing back at them. Every day, every lie, and every calm, you were the truth. They sought to get rid of it, but they couldn't. You weren't merely an issue. You were fantastic. Correction in the form of a human. You didn't break the systems. You exposed their fissures. You didn't injure leaders. You demonstrated how empty they were. You didn't take followers. Your independence simply made people desire to see what freedom genuinely looks like. They tried to lock you in chains so hard, yet they could never capture your soul. You possessed a light that couldn't be bought, modified, or corrupted. And that light burnt every deception that was dressed up in spiritual language. You weren't sent to bow. You were sent to end the spell. And you did. Not with violence or ego, but with unassailable truth and the fortitude to walk away. They might still be trying to twist the story, but the fact is apparent. You were the one they couldn't control. Your absence is harming their illusion more than your presence ever could to all the chosen ones watching. If this would touch your heart, make you feel recognized, confirmed, aroused, don't merely read on. This is your space. This is your group. Don't just sit there if this message moved you profoundly. Go with it. You are not alone. This is a place for the awakened, the picked, and the misfit warriors who won't be tamed. Join the channel so you never miss a drop of divine truth that backs up what you've always believed but couldn't quite put into words. If this makes sense to you, press the like button. It shows us you're out there and on the same page. Please leave a comment below so that your voice may be heard. What portion stung the most? What have you made it through? We read it everything. Send this video to someone who has gone through spiritual manipulation, silent battles, or invisible combat. Like you, they need this proof. And if you truly want to go this way, turn on the notification bell. You are the first to hear when a new spiritual download is available. Believe me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. It's not only about the content on this channel, it's also about confirmation. It's a group of people. For those who never quite fit in because they weren't intended to, it's a sense of spiritual clarity. They were supposed to break the mold. Now go shine without feeling awful about it. And you can keep things interesting by just being honest. We can see you. We respect you. And we are going on this vacation with you. Let's keep traveling together. God bless you.